This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on 75 years of independent India. The participants are Professor Subrata Mukherjee, political analyst, and Vinay Kumar, journalist.
India completed 75 years of its independence on 15th of August. The journey has been momentous. From early decades as a free young nation to a transformative nation embarking on journeys across several sectors, ruled by multiple governments, structural changes to the economy. By becoming the sixth largest economy in the world, India has come a long way. On this day, we want to look back at 7.5 decades of our independence and visualize and analyze that what we have achieved in different fields, whether it is space, education, health, technology, international relations, or agriculture sector. Professor Mukherjee, if we look back at our journey of 75 years, today where do you find India in the Committee of Nations?
Vinay, if you really look to the entire developmental process in India, it is a stupendous achievement. If you really look to the Indian situation during the colonial rule and after, there is hardly any comparison. And what happens is that if you really look to the spirit of freedom, that was expressed many times, even during the freedom movement itself. If you remember that in 1938, the idea of the Planning Commission comes in, when Subhash Bose was the president of the Indian National Congress, and he makes Jawaharlal Nehru the president of it. And in the context of that, we find important luminaries like Meghnad Saha really drawing up a plan of free India. During the Second World War, we find the emergence of the Bombay Plan, and then we also find M.N. Roy's People's Plan as the projecting what the free India should be. Even during this time, we find there are any number of inclinations and directions from Mahatma Gandhi about the shape of free India. And the most important thing that comes out of all of them, they really wanted the nation to really catch up. You see, the decades and the centuries we have lost under the foreign domination, there was a need to catch up. And this, I think, was said splendidly by Homi Bhabha when he said that we have missed the industrial revolution, but we cannot miss the atomic revolution. And if you really look to the period in the late 40s and the 50s, all this blueprint of what India should be was thought and executed. The most important of it was the Nehru-Mahalanebish plan with a thrust towards industrialization, and also Nehru's famous statement that it is these industries and the dams and other projects, those will be the temples of modern India. So these important layers of a developmental state was laid at the very inception of independence and is continues even today.
Professor Mukherjee, if we look at some of the figures and some of the sectors where our country has performed in these areas, we are now largest democracy in the world with 91.2 crore eligible registered voters. We are sixth largest economy at $3.17 trillion, just behind US, China, Japan, Germany and UK. Our exports have been the key driver of growth, particularly after 1991 economic liberalization. There has been surge in forex reserves. And our food grain production, once when we were dependent upon other nations to fulfill the needs of our citizens, we have seen since 1947, 500% jump in our food grain production. Similarly, our network of national highways has multiplied by nearly 300% during the past so many decades and sevenfold wise from 1950-51 to 21-22. Power sector has become surplus and there is a spike in number of automobiles. So we are also now become third largest domestic aviation market. And you were talking about atomic revolution. I would like to draw your attention to the white revolution and the green revolution, where we have performed rather well. And our access to higher education has improved. Life expectancy has improved. So all these parameters, India has rather performed well after consolidating its democratic process, its democracy, looking towards economic consolidation again, then liberalization. So broadly, we can divide in 2-3 periods. We have seen wars. We have won these wars, we have made new beginnings and realized new ambitions as a young nation. As in this 75 years. Now the task is we have to set goals for the next 25 years. By 2047, India will be a developed country, as Prime Minister Modi said from the ramparts of Red Fort on 15th of August.
Well, Vinay, what you are saying is absolutely correct, that India's achievement had been quite impressive. If you remember that when we were growing up, we were dependent on the PL 480, grain supplies from the United States, and the rationing of everything, from milk to sweets to anything, and the entire nation was on a restricted diet in a way, that even that how many people really attend the marriage party was also really decided by the state. From that way, I think India's achievement had been stupendous. And as you point out that a great achievement is that we have been able to achieve it during the democratic framework when many other countries which got independence like India with favorable circumstances really collapsed. And in that way, the domineering aspect of India's cultural heritage and also the stability of the political process, I think great examples for the world, and we also can think in terms where it went wrong and what are the important ingredients and the directions that we have to take. Pranab Bardhan recently in an essay pointed out that three mega things that the Indian state achieves which are often overlooked. One is the conduct of elections. Right from the first election until now, organizing election in a free and fair manner is not an easy task, and in that way, India, I think, has become an example to the world. Second is the census. Every 10 years, census takes place, and again, going to every household, really collecting the important data, and then creating a national register is also an important achievement. And the third thing that Pranab Bardhan says is the enormity of the religious festivals that also India organizes quite well, and there the societal intervention initiative is manifest with proper state support. Now, if you really look to the general framework that we have provided, India is a good example of a developmental state, other two being Japan and South Korea. And looking to the limitations and problems of the Indian situation and the long colonial exploitation, I think whatever we have achieved is quite good, but there are also miles to go. For instance, you mentioned about the India being the sixth largest economy of the world, but by 2050, our aim is to become the third largest. And that means a reasonable growth rate of the economy and providing the necessary infrastructure to it, and also the fact that India is a young nation, and the young nation means both responsibility and a dividend that we have to work out in a nice manner that our developmental needs are fulfilled. For instance, a very important factor that where we have to look to is that how do we increase our dependence on the farm sector? Now, even today, 41% of the employment really comes out of the farm sector, and the industrial sector and service sector, though the service sector has grown enormously, but still remain very restricted. So we have to work out some ways of really creating a new balance between industry and agriculture, and to see that the dependence on the agriculture sector diminishes. Similarly, if you really look to the way the education system has evolved in India, the literacy rates have become impressive, and some states like Himachal Pradesh and Kerala have done wonderfully well. And if you really look to the family planning, the southern states have done extremely well. So what is to be seen in India is that there is a collective achievement of the Indian nation, and also there is a sectoral development where some states and in some sectors we have done extremely well, but in some of them we are still faltering.
Professor Mukherjee, as you rightly pointed out, education and healthcare remain two most crucial sectors where our population needs much more push. And if we perform well in these two key areas, naturally our human development index will also improve. and we will do pretty well in the social sector. But Professor Mukherjee, if we see at foreign policy, our international relations, during Jawaharlal Nehru's time, we had this non-aligned movement. Now we are entering into strategic relations with the US. We have strategic ties with so many other countries. We are part of Quad. And our government has laid a great stress on improving relations in the neighborhood, like Act East policy we have now. But so how well we have performed on this front?
Well, if you really look to that, you mentioned Quad, but we are also a member of the BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation and many others. I think the tradition of India being independent in foreign policy continues. We look to our interests, we look to our perception, and in the context of the situation, we really make the shifts, but the independence remains. And many times it has happened in the context of India's foreign policy that many of the bigger powers were unhappy with us, but over a period of time, I think we have also earned their respect, because India's foreign policy is based on certain fundamental principles. And again, I will like to point out the origin of it in the nationalist movement itself, and that we do not compromise. You remember the non-alignment of Nehru became genuine non-alignment to his Vajpayee's time. And after that, we have really followed a practice of self-interest, self-restraint, and also the fact that we have made India proud as a nation which does not follow any particular nation or any model per se, but we always thought of a perspective that is typically Indian and which I think has paid good dividend to our foreign policy and also domestic one.
Professor Mukherjee, now on these two fronts, extreme poverty, we have got rid of extreme poverty. Middle class has vastly expanded over the past few years. And we have done pretty well on healthcare front also. Although so much more needs to be done, doctor-patient ratio has to be improved. So do you think we have been able to achieve all this together?
Well, I will begin with one, Vinay. And that is the Commonwealth Games. Sports is again a reflection of sports nationalism and a good indicator of a nation's progress. And here again, I think, for the last few years in the international competitions, we have been able to give to the world many Milkha Singhs. And in that way, it is a crucial area of development. Now, if you really look to the ways you have described it, that in all these sectors, we have done, and in many of them we have excelled. But the question is to consolidate it and to take the nation further. I like to point out a very important indicator of a nation's progress in the context of a consolidated development when every single sector and every single arena gets certain benefit. I am not talking of trickle-down theory, but I am talking of the real participation and development. For instance, the liberalization process has enabled a Dalit middle class to emerge and the entrepreneurship that is remarkable. In the areas of education and in the context of healthcare, lot of things are to be done, mainly in the context, if you really look to, that the education needs reform and we will have to channelize our young population to productive employment, and those avenues are to be worked out. Now, if you really look to what we have done in India, that we have built IITs and IIMs, TIFR, Indian Institute of Science, but we have neglected the middle level education sector, the ITI. So now I think what is required is a balanced development in which all the sectors of the Indian population will be accommodated, and slowly there is an increase in the per capita income and also the quality of life of every single individual, and the indication is that India is quite well equipped to achieve it within the reasonable 25 years that the Prime Minister has envisaged.
As a united, independent, democratic nation, we strengthen our roots and we continue to grow economically by fixing our institutions, spending more on health and education. And this is one thing which the coming governments will be able to achieve. With this hope, we wind up this discussion. Thank you very much, Professor Mukherjee, for this discussion. Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on 75 years of independent India. The participants were Professor Subrato Mukherjee, political analyst, and Vinay Kumar, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.